So I was born in Tehran in April of 1980. So at the time, there was the revolution against the Shah. And so these borders shut down, and my mom was just like, I'm not staying here. When I've talked to her, she's always saying, the only reason I survived is because I had you. And I remember that particular time, I was actually spending some alone time with my uncle. I think I was working in his yard for some money. And during a break, he said, do you believe in God? Like just bluntly out of the blue, he just said, do you believe in God? And I was so taken aback that analytical part kicked in. And I was thinking, if I repeat another 28 years under my rules, I'm probably going to get the same result.
In this episode of the Wayfaring Stranger podcast, I talked to Azad Ebrahimzadeh, also known as his call sign Oz. Oz was a Green Beret in the U.S. Army Special Forces and was an 18 Delta, which is a Special Forces medical sergeant. In this episode, we talk about his mother's flee from Iran when he was still a baby, and their journey to meet his father in Germany and eventually come over to the United States. We also talk about his trouble with the law which caused him to join the Army in the first place, as well as his story of faith and what led him to finally accept Christ when he was 28 years old. I was honored to have Oz sit down with me and talk about his journey joining the military, as well as his insights on faith and the simple lessons he learned about God's character from his daughter. Please enjoy this episode. What's the least accurate war movie you've ever seen?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Some of the movies of today have no excuse anymore when you've seen stuff like Saving Private Ryan, which is pretty old now, but super accurate. Least accurate, there's a lot. And they make really dumb mistakes. Like they put the chevrons on the uniforms upside down, or they call a guy that's a corporal a captain. It's really hard. I might have to get back to it because there's so many. I watched one last night. It was called the Beekeeper, and they were supposed to be like Delta and SEAL Team 6 guys, but they were like completely backwards, like in terms of their structure of ranking systems and what they were calling people. And
yeah.
It was just embarrassing. There's no excuse. There's so much information. You can literally Google these people's uniforms and you can just go off of that. You don't even have to hire a technical advisor anymore.
I didn't know Beekeeper was a military movie. What about I just saw it for the first time. Have you seen Jarhead? That was like Jake Gyllenhaal. Jamie Foxx was the...
That's an older one, right?
2005.
Okay. No, yeah. I haven't seen that one.
It was very the saddest scene in the film, which I don't even know how realistic this is. Maybe it's realistic. Like the calmest guy, they were snipers. So Jake and his buddy. And his buddy had been there for years and years and years. Until they were forcing him out because they're just like, you've just been here too long. And they had the shot lined up to take out the guy.
Sure.
And then...
They're like a two-man team, is that what?
Yeah, two-man sniper team in a tower. And they see another sniper in a tower. Or he wasn't even a sniper. He may have been just a commander in a tower. And they had him locked in. And then the guy who played Jake Gyllenhaal's friend is asking for clearance. Like, this is what he's waited for because he's never gotten to really do anything.
Sure.
And the commander says, no, we're going to light the whole thing up. So just no. And then he's freaking out on the commander. And he's starts breaking down because he's like, I'll do it. And then you can do that. And he's like, no. He's like, let me do it, freaking out like that. Did you know people like that in the military who were really hungry to... Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of different reasons to join the military. There's good ones and there's bad ones, right? So I definitely know that there's a group of people that would join just for the opportunity to experience what it feels like to kill someone and not go to jail for it. I'm definitely not going to name any names, but there are some very well-known military guys that are highly coveted in our culture that were doing that. I mean, everyone's got their reasons. I definitely didn't think I was ever going to join the military. I did it to get out of jail. So my reasons were very different. But, there's people that have a lineage of father, grandfather, father's grandfather, all over the place, and they have almost like an inherent obligation to join. And then there's people that get in trouble There's people that join for the college money, but there's also people that join for more sinister, selfish reasons.
Mm. I did ask you what the worst military movies were. Are there any ones that you think are really good?
Yeah, there's some that are really good. There's some that are good that are more like paramilitary. If you know what that means, it's more of like agencies like we call them OGA or other government agencies. Typically, that's referring to like the CIA or something like that, or NSA operatives or DIA operatives. Those are groups that we typically didn't have really any visual field of reference for in movies until more recently when we started to engage with contractors overseas, and those contractors worked for those agencies. I've worked for them in the past, and they definitely have a culture and a look and a language that is very unique. And you know how some people can pick out their own in a group? Military guys are the same, and even on a more specific level, special operations guys are the same. Like you can look at someone and be like, yeah, that guy's a SEAL, or that guy's in MARSOC, or that guy works for the agency. You can pick them out. And there's a lot of little things that give them away. But I think that the ones that have been accurate, gosh, there's quite a few. There's one with Mark Wahlberg. I think it's called 22 Mile. And that's specifically talking about a covert team that, I don't know if they imply it or not, but like CIA type. And they're all paramilitary. The organization that I worked with, you had to have 6 years as a special operations soldier to be eligible to even apply to the position.
Wow.
So you had to be a SEAL, you had to be SF. Yeah, they didn't include some of the other guys that are considered special operations. It was really mainly those guys that they wanted, because those guys have specific attributes along with specific skills. Like a group of SEALs behave differently than a group of Green Berets or a group of Rangers. It's like almost like a weird herd mentality that is specific to that group. So when people are looking for a specific type of job to be done, they know how to pick that guy that has that atmosphere. Different teams have different requirements in terms of like personality too, because you don't want guys that are like completely not capable of socializing and then they're stuck in a high stress environment together. So we do like to try to find people that kind of meet the team's energy, so to speak. So the one that Mark Wahlberg was in, Mile 22 or 22 Mile or something like that, he's like a paramilitary operative. But what he does is he's operating on US soil, which specifically is forbidden in terms of like the charter of the agency. But I think what they were trying to mimic were the GRS guys from Benghazi. I mean, they modeled it perfectly in terms of like their structure, their gear, the way they moved and stuff like that. They've gotten really good. Another one that's really accurate to that elite level stuff is, I think it's Chris Hemsworth, the guy that played Thor. Is that right?
Yeah.
He played an SAS operator, British special operations guy who is rescuing someone. I think it's called
Extraction?
Extraction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone is not trained or like used to seeing the kind of moves that he's doing, you wouldn't really catch any of it. You just see like limbs flying, bullets flying,
Right.
an elbow here, a knee there, and you don't really think much of it. It's just like a strike and you don't think about it. But if you've been to courses that actually utilize that type of close defense, close combat, you go, whoa, who taught that guy how to do that?
Yeah.
Because there aren't any schools, civilian schools that I know of that teach that kind of stuff, which means somebody had to be a technical advisor and have probably shown him how to do this stuff. And I think what we saw, a huge shift in the accuracy of films, was we entered into the global war on terrorism, and then we saturated our military force in deployment. And fast forward 10 years, guys are starting to get out and they have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus deployments. And they have this incredible wealth of current combat knowledge, procedures, real life experiences, things that they've learned that are new and innovative, and technology really stepped up and we got all this cool gear. And they got out and they started marketing themselves to the Hollywood industry and selling themselves as technical advisors.
Yeah.
And now they're getting on stage and they're like, no, that tape doesn't go there. You tape this here, and no, you'd never wear that, or take this off, or say it like this, or say this word, and they get really creepy, like accurate. I know he wasn't in the military, so
Yeah.
how does he know to say that way, that word that way, or that thing that way? So it's pretty cool to see the accuracy. But then you're also, on one side, you're thinking, civilians shouldn't know how to do this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
there's no need to know some of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Have you ever been asked to advise on something like that for production or?
Not on TV shows. I did some commentary stuff on news about, sometimes they bring the expert in to comment on like a situation that's breaking on the news or something like that. I had done some stuff for television, and so they kind of had my name on a Rolodex or whatever they have nowadays. But they asked me to come in to comment on a couple situations. So very limited, but yeah, I've done it.
What kind of situations would they bring you in for?
There was one that was specific to anti-poaching, because I had done a lot of anti-poaching stuff. There was one that was specific to when they killed that lion on that safari.
This was a few years ago?
It was a few years ago. I will preface all that with, I've got a lot of TBIs from 20 plus years of being in the military. So my memory's like destroyed. So
what does TBI stand for?
Traumatic brain injuries, which they are like constantly learning more and more about. They're starting to classify like even rifle fire as like a miniature TBI. So they're like, well, how many times have you fired your weapon? I'm like, are you kidding me? But yeah, we do a lot of dumb things in the military that get us pretty banged up, and my memory is really shot. But I think it was Cecil the lion, if that's...
That sounds right. Yeah.
So they had basically lured out this less than optimal health condition lion out for a safari hunt. And essentially the lion was like trapped and had nowhere to go, nothing to do other than to get shot. And they kind of canned the hunt, I think. I might not be totally accurate, but that was kind of what the fire was about. And so I did something on that. There was a attack at the cafeteria in Australia that happened. I happened to have been there when it happened. There was a couple like incidents, nothing recently. I kind of pulled away from all that the last couple of years, and kind of wanted to not be so much in the spotlight.
So I looked you up a little bit and saw that your mother had escaped from the Middle East.
Yeah.
Was that after you were born?
Yeah. So I was born in Tehran in April of 1980. So at the time there was the revolution against the Shah, right? So the Shah was very pro-West. He had a great relationship with the United States, wanted to adapt the technology and the music and the culture. He really liked everything about the United States. And most of the conservative Islamic leadership really, really opposed all that stuff. Like they thought it was very sinful. It was very bad for the culture and the community. And so they started kind of coming together and creating a revolution against the Shah. So I was born like in the middle of that revolution, which really turned into like a civil war. And along with that, there was a war going on that lasted, I think, 8 years with Iraq. So, I mean, millions of people were dying. And I was born kind of dab smack in the middle of that. And my father really didn't want his son to be a part of that. My father was pretty anti, I don't want to say religion, but he's an atheist. And he didn't believe that any religion should dictate the way that people live their lives. So he's very angry against the oppression of Islamic law and stuff like that. So he was very outspoken. His brother was even more outspoken, caused a lot of trouble. But that's actually how I got my name. My first name is Azad, and it means free. So like to be free from oppression or free from tyranny or whatever you want to call it. And then my last name is Ebrahimzadeh. Ebrahim is the prophet Abraham, and Zadeh, it means the son of. So I'm the free son of Abraham is what my name translates to. But my mom was like 22 years old. I was a fat little baby in 1980. And I think it was 1982 when my mom was like seeing the war get to their front door. And they were like, we got to get out of here. This is getting crazy. My father had tried to get them out of the country, and I think his mother, my father's mother, was ill, and he had sought treatment for her in Germany. So he sent her in Germany. He was trying to send me and my mom to be her caretaker en route. The government was like, hey, we're not falling for this crap. You're not getting your kids out of here. You can go with your mom, but your kid and your wife are staying here. So he ended up going to Germany. They subsequently shut the border down. Nobody was coming in and out anymore. There was military engaging civilians that were trying to leave, like shooting them in the back as they're running away type stuff. And so these borders shut down, and my mom was just like, I'm not staying here. So I don't know how much stuff she had. I mean, she basically, what she could carry and me, she had like, I guess a little bit of money and a wedding ring and me, and she decided that she wasn't going to stay. So she found her way out of that war.
Mm. And did she go straight to Germany, or where did she go?
I never got really like a specific path from her. I know that her end state was Germany. I know that she had many near misses. She, in terms of being caught, I know that she hired smugglers to get her out. The details of her story are just, I mean, much more interesting than my story. So I think there was a point where she was in the back of one of those tarped, like kind of cargo trucks, the military style, driving through the desert, and it's like 110, 120 degrees out. So you can imagine how hot it is with a truck with the tarp over it. And, you know, people are passing out in the back of that truck, and she's trying to hold me, and I'm laying flat on her legs, and she just watches like the last breath come out of my body, and I don't take another breath. But she's so exhausted that she can't do anything about it. And some unknown Afghan guy comes over and grabs me by the leg and dips me in the water and gets me to cry and throws me back on her lap. I mean, that was like what she experienced, like being in a box, hidden in a crate, you know, soldiers around her trying to find them, people getting shot that are trying to escape around them. So a really harrowing experience. So when I've talked to her, she's always saying, you know, the only reason I survived is because I had you. Like, there's no way. I'd never had the strength to do this on my own, but because I had you, you gave me the strength to go on, which kind of brings me to another really, I guess you could say, ironic fact. My parents risked their lives to get me away from war. And then at 17, I get in trouble with the law. And what do? I join the Army. And then I end up spending 20 years doing it. So like, I don't know that I could have thrown sand in my parents' face any harder than that, but that's just the way life turned out. That was definitely never my plan, but that's how it turned out. And you had asked about the war movies. I thought of a couple other ones that were more recent that were pretty good. The Covenant, have you seen that?
I just saw that on a plane ride back, and that was way better than I thought it would be.
So they don't specifically tell you that he's a Green Beret or anything else, but I can tell you from his gear and his demeanor and, you know, the guys that he works with, you know, the guys that are actually in the office that are tabbed, he was depicting a Green Beret team sergeant. Pretty accurate, like really pretty good. There are some things that a little bit pushed the edges on left and right boundaries, but otherwise like super accurate. Super accurate. I think there's a couple more that are pretty close to that, but that was one of the more recent ones that I could think of that was actually pretty spot on in terms of accuracy, depiction of like guys on the field today.
Yeah, and that's not the first movie in the last decade that's been made about Afghanis helping U.S. military. There was the Lone Survivor as well.
Yeah.
And were they Army Rangers?
You mean the guys that were on the ground?
Lone Survivor, yeah.
There was a contingent of Army Rangers, yeah. There was. I don't know the exact involvement of the local nationals that helped, but you're right. It's not a rare thing. I know that there were guys in a conflict called the Shock Valley. I think guys got medals of honor. Like 2 guys got the Medal of Honor for that conflict in Afghanistan, and there were foreign interpreters that were pulling wounded U.S. troops out of the line of fire, like pulling them to safety and going out and retrieving other guys. And I can tell you, I just told my wife about this. I have a a friend of mine that, I mean, we trained for special forces together when I was like 18 years old. And on one of his deployments, his vehicle with his team was hit by an IED. His vehicle flipped over, caught fire, and his team like ran out to safety, not knowing that he was pinned down in the vehicle on fire. His Afghan interpreter ran through the fire, the gunfire, back to the vehicle that's on fire and pulled him out to safety. I mean, he said, I know I was dead. I mean, I watched my teammates leave the truck. They couldn't hear me yelling under the gunfire and the chaos, and they had just been blown up. Like, who can hear anything? But the interpreter had the wherewithal to look around and go, who's not here? And saw him like reaching out from underneath the debris and pulled him out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's ingrained like in the culture. This
It is.
A sense of hospitality.
And that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's a cultural obligation that's ingrained in them that they should treat their guests, protect their guests. I mean, they would take their food from their kids to give it to a person they don't even know that came up and needed help. And that is absolutely ingrained in the culture. Yeah, 100%.
Did you see aspects of that in your parents, even when you got stateside and everything?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to be the like the broken chain of custody for a culture, right? Because you're born in another country with their culture, but then you come to another country and you start to blend these cultures, right? Like we were celebrating Iranian holidays, but we were also celebrating American holidays. And so there's that blending that happens where you're like American, but you're not American. You're Iranian, but you're not Iranian. So yeah, I saw a lot of that. And in terms of like how I grew up, in terms of like the behavior, even in our language, in Farsi, we have a specific vocabulary for communication to convey more respect. When we refer to someone, we would say like shoma. Shoma is like saying you, but it's the only way that I can explain it. It's like saying you versus you, right? So it's like a very different attitude versus saying it the normal way, which is to. Shoma and to. To would be like how you would say it to like your buddy, you know, hanging out. But if you're talking to your father, you're talking to your grandfather, you're going to an interview, you're talking to a teacher, a professor, you would say shoma. So yeah, the culture really has a blanket around it, and that blanket kind of filters out some of the more aggressive, like indifference and kind of the less, I don't want to say professional. It's kind of hard to describe because it doesn't really exist. That concept doesn't exist in English, and a lot of other languages they don't have it, but they literally have. There's cultures that specifically have a pattern of behavior for being more polite or professional, more courteous.
What were aspects of that culture that made you stand out as you were growing up here?
You mean like as an American here?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. Just to kind of elaborate on how I got here. So I went to Germany with my mom when she smuggled us out. I lived in Germany, went to grade school in Germany, learned German. And then my father decided he didn't want to be a part of Germany anymore because he had some issues with getting a job. He's an engineer, super, super intelligent, like photographic memory, speaks multiple languages, but he felt held back in Germany and he left. He decided that we were going to leave. So we actually got sponsored by the US to come to, which I didn't know any of this until I did my top secret clearance. They're asking me questions that I didn't know about my family. I'm like, Mom, how did we get to the States? And she's like, oh, the US sponsored us. I'm like, what? So yeah, my parents, my mom was a nurse. My dad was an electronic engineer. So both highly skilled. At the time, I think it was like 1986 or 7, something like that. American government officials were looking for highly educated foreigners to bring into the country. And so they were sponsoring them if they qualified. The process was like 6, 7, 8 months long. My parents went to the office And within, I think, less than a month, they had tickets to fly to America. So they didn't even have time to like sell their furniture and their belongings. They gave everything away. And at the time, it was myself and my sister who was born there. She's 3 years younger than I am. And they got up and moved to the States. I think they had a stipend, like a monthly stipend to live off of. But my dad had a job like within a couple weeks. My mom had one within a couple months. They felt such a tremendous gratitude for America having given them this opportunity, like paying for their flight, paying for them to live and take care of their kids. My dad and my mom wanted to make a point not to take anything more that they didn't absolutely need. So they got jobs as quickly as they could.
And where's the first place you lived here?
I think the first place we lived that I remember was in Mission Viejo, California, because my uncle was actually in California. And that's kind of how my dad picked from Germany that he wanted to go there. My uncle was like, you won't believe this place. It's amazing. All these opportunities. And there's this thing called mini skirts.
Yeah.
Probably not, but he might have said that.
Yeah.
And so we went to California, Southern California. And that was the first place that I really remember living outside of Germany.
And is that where you grew up?
Yeah, for the most part. Most of my, I think the imprinting that happens when you're a kid, most of it happened by like the time I was from the age of 7 on, happened while I was in the States. So when I got to the States, I was speaking Farsi and I was speaking German. And then all of a sudden this teacher wants me to start learning English. And from the way my mom explains it, she said that I refused to speak English and I would answer everything in German mixed with some Farsi. So my parents forbid me from speaking any more German and wouldn't talk to me if I spoke in German or Farsi. Like they just wouldn't respond. They'd ignore me until I spoke to them in English. And that's how I picked up English. But subsequently, I forgot how to speak German.
But you still have Farsi.
Yeah.
What happened when you were 17 that led to this joining the military?
I've always been, for lack of a better term, kind of a brat, like a rule bender, not so much a breaker, but like a bender. And I had like a butterfly knife we used to drive down like Tijuana and fireworks and, knives and crap like that you could get down there. You couldn't get anywhere else. We just buy it because it was cool. We were like 16, 17 years old. But I had a little dinky pickup truck and I had a butterfly knife in my dash. And I remember I didn't make a full stop on a right turn. And this cop pulled me over and it was me and my girlfriend at the time and my best friend in the car. My best friend's black. Didn't help things much because he was like, I'm a gangster. He was trying to be a tough guy. And I think I had like bleach blonde hair because I was like surfing and skating and just this little punk. So you can imagine like this cop's like, who are these idiots? And he came up to the window and he's like, is that marijuana I smell? I'm like, no. He's like, are you sure? I'm pretty sure. I don't smoke anything and he doesn't smoke anything. He's like, can we search the vehicle? And like an idiot, I said yes, because I had nothing to hide. So they go through my truck and they find this butterfly knife. Well, it's possession of a deadly weapon, right? So they arrested me, pressing charges. And eventually what ended up happening was I had a buddy who was enlisting in the military. He kind of dropped the idea with me, hey, you could do a short enlistment and it'll probably wipe everything away. And so that's what I did. We went to court and I said, hey, I'm joining the military. I told them I'd already signed my enlistment paperwork. And I think the recruiter backdated it to make it look like I had. And I just showed up and I was like, hey, give me the first job I could do. Because you got to take this, the Azad, which is like a test in which your aptitude for certain topics is measured for the military, which they determine what your MOS or your military occupational specialty will be. I scored really well. He was like, yeah, you can pretty much do whatever you want. I said, I need to leave now. He was like, okay, well, you can do the infantry. And I was like, cool, what's that? Let's do that. So I signed up and joined the military.
What branch?
Army.
And then what happened from there? You mentioned special forces. So you eventually got into special forces?
Yeah. So I think I had to reach a point in my environment that I was now in, because I was in a completely controlled environment in basic training. I had to make a decision at some point where I was either going to embrace it or I was going to let it go. And I got into a fight with this guy in basic training, and I was given the option to quit. So I remember the commander said, "Hey, we can let you go. You can go home, put this all behind you, or you can start over. But if you start over, you're starting at week 0." And at the time there was, I want to say like 12 weeks straight of basic training, because infantry basic training, which I did in Fort Benning, Georgia, it was your basic training was combined with your individual training, like your skills training, or AIT, advanced individual training. Most other jobs, you go to basic and then you go to your other place and you learn how to do radios. But ours was all in the same place. It was just one continuous ass whooping. And right when I chose to start over, I think I was in like week 10. So that means I'd really done 11 weeks of basic training. I decided to do it again. My mom was like, come home, come home. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, I will never be able to look at myself if I quit just because it's hard. Like, I can't. I have to have a better reason than that to quit. And so I went back to the commander, the first sergeant, and I said, I'm willing to start over. So they're like, awesome. You're starting at week 0. And by the way, we've added a week to your AIT. So now it's 14 weeks plus your 0 week, which is 15 weeks. So good luck.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and at that point I had to make a decision that I was going to do it. And when I decided to do it, like before I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, I didn't put much effort towards like the runs. I pretended like I was more tired than I was. And I was like, just cutting corners. But when I decided that I was going to do it, like, I was all in. And that's the kind of person I think I am just in general. So when I made that decision and I got to my infantry unit, I did really well. So they made me a team leader really quickly. And then at that point, I realized that I was really good at doing this. And I'd always been in really good shape. So that was never an issue. But like the analytical mind necessary to plan, conduct, execute missions, and put things together, I was just good at it. And so I decided that I was going to train for a higher level unit.
What happened between you and the other guy that led to this whole thing?
He was a white supremacist, and he just said something about, I can't remember specifically, but I'm pretty sure he just said something, and I punched him. I don't even know if he actually said it to me, to be totally honest. Yeah, I think he ended up quitting, but I figured I could take another few weeks.
So at this point, you had mentioned that your father is an atheist. You grew up in a Muslim area. So when did Christianity become real to you?
It's a super interesting question. My dad and my mom never talked about God or the concept of God, ever. And I didn't really even know to ask them what they believed, because it wasn't something that was ever discussed. The first time anyone in my family brought up the word God or the concept of God, it was my uncle when I had come back from basic training, I think, or some maybe before I left. I can't remember the exact timeline, but I didn't really spend a lot of alone time with family members. And I remember that particular time I was actually spending some alone time with my uncle. I think I was working in his yard for some money. And during a break, he said, do you believe in God? Like, just bluntly out of the blue, he just said, do you believe in God? And I was so taken aback at the question. It was the last thing I had ever thought would come out of my family's mouth, was a question about God. And I said, I don't know. And that, I think, triggered a cascade of me trying to figure out what I believed in. And so I had read, about Buddhism and about Taoism, Islam, Christianity, Catholicism, Protestants. I was just trying to figure out what I thought made sense, which is a really arrogant way to go about looking at a religion, is what agrees with what I already think is right, right? My mom is agnostic, so she's very spiritual, but I don't know what she truly believes in. My grandmother was a devout Muslim. Like when I walked out of the house, she'd hold the Quran over my head and like say a prayer. And then like it was very, very an organized religion, the way that Islam is. But I started a long, long journey trying to figure out what I believed. I think one of the most influential events that led me to Christianity was when I met my first wife, because she was a very devout Christian woman and her family was as well, and I wasn't. And they weren't very happy with that. But she held on to me and we persevered and got married against, even the teachings in the Bible of a differently yoked couple. But I was an arrogant 21, 22-year-old guy, and she was a young woman who had faith in her husband. And we thought we could make this work. We don't have to be equally yoked. Like, whatever, we're invincible. We know everything, right? And it was a catastrophe. I mean, we fought about everything. And it was really because we had different values, just like the Bible says. But she challenged me to not give up on the concept. She said, hey, I know that my family's been terrible and so-and-so's been terrible, and they say that they're Christians, but they're behaving this way. Don't judge Christ based off of these people. These people are imperfect people. And I promised her that I would never close the book on it. And it's actually the tattoos on my hands. One of them is to seek to find God, and one is an absence. So it's like to have an absence of God and seek to find him is what the tattoo means to me. And it was towards the very end of our already failed marriage that I found Christianity. I was 28, I think. And it was actually right here in Ladera Ranch, like a street over was where it happened, on the steps of the front of the house at 3:00 in the morning on November 28th. I had come back from a deployment injured. I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue in my profession because of my injuries. My marriage had fallen apart. I had no money. I had no savings. My wife didn't want anything else to do with me. My kid at the time barely knew anything about me. So I had nothing. And I remember saying this to myself, like, cause I'm a pretty analytical person. And I sat down on the step and I was like, this is a result of 28 years of living my life by my rules, nobody else, not the laws of the country, not the laws of God, my rules. And this is my result. Complete devastation, chaos, horrible. And I've destroyed everyone around me while destroying myself. And that analytical part kicked in. And I was thinking, if I repeat another 28 years under my rules, I'm probably going to get the same result. And so at that point, I literally, at that point, I got down on my knees and I looked up and I said, I give in. I give in. You win. I want to do it your way. And I gave myself to Christ. And right after that, it was like, I don't know if people have had a similar experience, but it was like right afterward, all of a sudden, everything around me like started to like, it felt like it was giving me messages, like signals. Like I would walk past a bookshelf and it would have like this message about Christ. Like I'd have this question in my head and I'm asking this question and I look over and there's like the answer is the title of a book. And I'm like, whoa, that's creepy. Or I'd flip through something and it would stop and it would say something about Christianity. I mean, it was like everywhere. It was really freaking me out at first. But then I saw kind of the beauty of it, that I was being led to these answers. I'm asking questions and I'm being given answers.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Your testimony reminds me of the passage where a lot of people left Christ at one point because something he was saying was too difficult for them to bear. And then he's like, you too, to the rest of his disciples. And they're like, Peter, to where else will we go? You have the words of eternal life.
Yeah.
As hard as this is, like, what else are we going to do?
I don't know how people that don't have Christ, like maybe not even just Christ, but maybe they don't have a God. I don't know how they live. Like, how do they get through disasters? How do they get through the loss of a child? How do they get through a stillborn baby? How do they get through that? Like I personally, I don't have the strength within. I know. I mean, I've done a lot of really crazy things and I've endured a lot of things in my life, but I know the limitations of my strength. And I know that if I lost my mom, which I will eventually, or my kids, or my wife, Elizabeth, I would not have the strength in this body to survive it.
Yeah.
I can't. I know that I can't. So I know that the only thing that I can is that the failure of my strength, I have to do what I did in combat. I have to latch on to that stronger teammate that helped me get up, and that's God. So I don't know. I question it every time I see someone struggling, something that's not, your mind's not capable of processing, and they're not Christian or they don't believe in God. I'm like, how do you reconcile this? Like, how do you cope?
Yeah. It kind of goes two ways as well, because there's also the sense of being a Christian is harder in a sense.
Absolutely.
In the sense that now you have right and wrong. And now you're exposed to the truth, so you don't have an excuse as to why you don't do something.
Absolutely. I mean, once you're exposed to the truth, you're responsible for it, right? I mean, you no longer have the opportunity to brush it aside in the name of ignorance. And that does definitely make it harder. And I do specifically remember the first couple of years as a Christian. I don't know why. This is what I thought. I thought once I give myself to Christ, I'm a good person. Like, I'm not going to look at porn. I'm not going to covet what other people have. I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to wish ill on people that do horrible things to me. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. And I was failing like left and right. I'm like swearing at someone in my head because they're too slow in the line at the grocery store. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? I'm a Christian. I can't do that. And so I constantly felt like I was a failure. I constantly felt like I am failing at this God thing that I'm trying to do. And I'm really struggling with it. I think one thing that really helped me in that moment, and I was going through special forces, schools and deployments and stuff. I don't remember where, but I got the book, The Shack, and not exactly the greatest like Christian novel, right? But someone had given me a copy of The Shack and I was reading it on a plane one day and I got to a part where a very relatable message is being passed. And the character is talking to God and he's saying, you must be so disappointed in me. I must have let you down, God. And the response was something that like literally like stopped everything for me. And he said something, and I'm destroying it, but something to the nature of, I'm God. Expectations are not something that I have. Humanity created disappointment out of expectation because they don't know the outcome of something and they're hoping for something to turn out a certain way. I don't hope for things to come out a certain, I already know the outcome. So I know that if you don't turn to Christ today, you're one day closer to turning to Christ. I know that if you've made the same mistake 150 times, that you'll reach the correct one by 250. You can't disappoint me. And I was just like, because that was literally what was in my head was I'm disappointing God. And I read that message and I was like, it made me realize what a different spectrum or a different plane I had been on compared to what the Lord is on, if that makes any sense. Like the dimension of thought that I had was limited to what we think of as people and how we solve problems as humans on the planet, right? So we can solve problems this way. We have to do A, B, and C. God goes and it's done. So God doesn't have expectations. That concept doesn't exist for him. And I didn't realize that as a new Christian. And so that was huge. I mean, that just, that gave me tremendous comfort.
So that's a few years into you being in the faith. So you turned to Christ around year 28, but you're still in the military for another 9 years.
Yeah.
So how did your experience in the military change now that you're a believer?
It changed in terms of like what was acceptable behavior. Special forces guys in particular, they're a very small group of people. I mean, I've never understood why guys BS their way through their career and get on a podcast and talk about the time they won 3 medals of honor, saving John Rambo. I don't understand that, because guess what? Somebody's going to hear that. Someone's going to ask somebody on your ODA, or ask someone who knows some, like, it's a small, small community. Lying about being a SEAL, lying about experiences, you're just setting yourself a trap that you're going to step into. So I never understood that. Special forces guys, there are stereotypes about them just like there are everything else. Like when I joined SF, there was a kind of a running joke. They're like, yeah, you got your Green Beret, but you're not really a Green Beret until you buy a Harley and you get a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the kind of attitude there was about it. And yeah, we have the highest divorce rate of, like, I think any profession on the planet. Look at what we do. We're gone. And then we go to third world countries, like, with funds and no oversight, and like people take advantage of opportunities that they get. And it's unfortunate, but there are people that claim to be Christians, but they don't hold themselves to these standards of Christ, and they behave poorly. And I wasn't on like a warpath or anything, but I wasn't like a good, honest, godly person before I became Christian. I figured that if I just did good and I treated people well, then I'm doing okay. But that's not really correct at all. If you're a Christian and you understand Christian doctrine, that's not correct. It's much deeper than that. And doing right by the other person has nothing to do with being right by God. So it challenged me to step up to a whole nother level of expectation that I had for myself in terms of how I interacted with other people, what I thought was right and what I thought was wrong. We worked in a line of work where those decisions meant somebody was going to die. That's a pretty big thing. And I was a Delta. So I was a trauma surgeon on the battlefield along with my teammates. Someone got hurt, they came to me. So there's a tremendous responsibility there when you've got bits and pieces of your teammate blown all over your body and you're trying to put them back together. How do you reconcile those things if you don't have God behind you? I know a lot of guys that survived the war, but didn't survive coming home. And some of them didn't come home mentally. I don't think I'd be alive if my family my whole life hadn't imploded when I was 28. I honestly don't think I would be alive at all, because I chose a completely different path. There were organizations and units that I was going to go to that would have put me at greater risk than I already was. And I promised my daughter I wouldn't. And we joke to this day, she has a memory like an elephant. She does not forget stuff. So it changed everything. It changed the path of my life. It changed my behavior, even on the battlefield, my behavior at home. My conversations with my parents changed. And that's what it's supposed to do. You don't become a Christian and then it's like, yeah, this part of my life changed. It's supposed to change you, not a part of your life.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it did. And some of it I fought tooth and nail, but what's the point of slapping a stream going the other way? I mean, it's like you're fighting the current. Like, this is what God wants. This is what's right. This is what you know to be right. Why are you fighting this? So it's like, I don't know, we're bullheaded people, Persians. Couple that with my personality. I'm a pretty strong personality, I guess is a safe word. So being stubborn and strong and being in special operations, we're bullheaded. So, God just had to take a bigger swing at me to fall. That's it. That's all it was.
So you mentioned Green Beret. So you're Green Beret. Delta Surgeon, not Delta Force.
So there's a distinction there.
Okay.
Delta Force is a unit of Green Berets. So if you were to like draw it on a chart, it would be Special Operations Command would be like a giant umbrella over all these things, right? And then the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, and the Army, even I think the Coast Guard, all fall underneath that umbrella where their special operations pieces of those units, of those branches, are under the command of special operations. So we call them SOFs, SOFs, Special Operations Forces. That's an umbrella term. You could call someone SOF and they could be an Air Force weatherman, because apparently that's a special operations thing. Or they could be a SEAL, or they could be a Green Beret. So those distinctions are very vague. And then when you break it down, Special Forces is specific to those that wear a Green Beret in the U.S. Army. It was given to us by John F. Kennedy. So John F. Kennedy literally said, this is a mark of distinction to separate you from the rest, to show that you have accomplished something special, something great. So we wore the Green Beret. SEALs are Naval Special Warfare. Marines, we call them MARSOC, Marine Special Operations. So they're all different. Delta or Delta Force, CAG, Combat Application Group, whatever you want to call them, they have a ton of different names. They are a unit of Green Berets that have a specific mission and a structure, a command structure that's different from your traditional Green Beret. So they're not to be messed up or confused. So when I referred to Delta, we have positions on the team. Our teams are called ODAs, Operational Detachment Alphas. Those are the active duty, active teams that are going out and doing special operations missions. On that team, you have a commander, which is a captain, which is an 18 Alpha. Okay, so in the military, in the Army, MOS, military occupational specialty, is identified in this manner. There's a number. Whatever that number is it correlates with a branch of the military's function, more or less. So like 11, we call it an 11 series job. I was an infantryman. You could be an infantryman that carries a rifle, which is an 11 Bravo, or you could be an 11 Charlie. A Charlie carries a mortar around, or you could be mechanized, or you could, like, all these different things, right? So the number 18 in the MOS fields is specifically for Special Forces. Like if all you saw was 18, you'd know he's Special Forces, but you don't know what. You don't know if he's a captain. You don't know if he's an engineer. You don't know if he's a medic. You don't know if he's a communications guy or a construction demolition guy, intel guy. So there's a team, and that team consists of the captain, the co-commander or the warrant. Then there's Bravos, which are weapons, Charlies, which are construction and demolition. They're the guys that teach us how to use demolitions, but they can also build a building. But they know where to put the charge to bring a bridge down or bring a building down this way or that way. The Echoes are our communications guys. So they go into a lot of electronic training. They know how to use radios, satellite technology, all that other stuff. Deltas, which is what I was, we go to a surgical school. So we actually go through a med school, and then we go through advanced trauma surgical skills. We learn veterinary medicine, dental medicine. There's additional courses we take for like high altitude medicine, dive medicine, tropical medicine. We deliver babies. We deliver freaking wildlife. Like you can deliver a cow if you're in Afghanistan. Like I've watched a teammate deliver a cow. There's a Fox, 18 Fox, which is our intel guy. So there's distinctions. So when I refer to I was a Delta, that's specific to I was an 18 Delta on an ODA, which means you're a Green Beret and your specialty is medicine. That's what that means.
What does that look like in a combat situation if you're a surgeon? Are you fighting until something happens?
So one of the first things we learn in our pipeline for the 18 Delta program, which is about 3 years long, including their language training that we have to do, is you learn the priorities of work. And we have a acronym that we use. Everything in the military is an acronym. Everything. Like if you've ever gone to like a commander's brief, they literally speak in acronym, and it just sounds like a bunch of gibberish. Absolute gibberish. But we have one that's called TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty care. So that's written that way for a reason. It's the priorities of work. The priorities of work is tactical. Do your tactical work. So if we're in a ambush and we get attacked and one of my teammates gets injured, the first thing I'm doing is I'm pursuing the enemy. My job is to pursue the enemy, kill the threat before it creates other casualties. So that's number one, you pursue the enemy. We say the best medicine downrange is more bullets. So to caveat that, each member of my team carries a personal IFAK or individual first aid kit. Usually I make those, the medic makes those for the guys, and he trains them how to use them. I'll train my guys to a level of care beyond a paramedic. Each guy on my team can do beyond what a paramedic can do, because what happens when I get shot and I'm unconscious and I'm losing blood and he needs to apply a tourniquet and get an IV on me and push trauma drugs? How does he know how to do that? He doesn't go to school for it. He's a freaking radio guy, right? And all that isn't to like take away from what we do in terms of blow stuff up and shoot. We all do the same thing. And inherently in some of the other special operations communities, it's kind of the same. Like if you're a SEAL, you might have been a radioman before you were a SEAL, or you might have been an independent duty corpsman, which is a medic, before you became a SEAL. Those organizations like to see that you bring some skill set to the group. And so we typically have, this combat training. We all do it. We all shoot. We all jump out of planes. We all use explosives. We all do all the crazy stuff that everybody does. SEALs, MARSOCs, SF, Rangers all do combat. But we have these specific skills that we can do to maintain our force independently of a greater support element. So we can fix our radios. We can treat injuries. We can do all these things. We can fix our weapons. We can do that without relying on anyone else to do it. And that's something that's really capitalized as Green Berets, is that we're force multipliers. We expand. We can build an army. That's what we used to do. That's foreign internal defense is what we used to do. That's what we were famous for, was we would create guerrilla forces and we would send them off to fight the war in a foreign country, helping them overthrow the government. That's kind of that's what our specialty was. And it's broadened. We still do a lot of that, but it's broadened just like everybody else's has. But that's what happens in terms of the specialty training. You begin the pipeline, you go through an assessment all together. Nobody has name tapes, nobody has rank. You just all show up. You're just who you are. You go through the assessment. You go, yes, you got picked, or no, you didn't. Yes, you got picked. You go to your first area of courses, which for me was like I had a block of language. After language, I went to SUT. So small unit tactics, patrolling, ambushes, raids, all that good stuff. After that, I got sent to my medical school. Other guys went to their schools from that, but we were all together. But then they go to their schools. I go to my school. I finish my school. We come back together. We finish school stuff. We separate again. We come back. That's kind of how it's designed. Not all courses are the same length, unfortunately. So you don't graduate with like a class that you started with. The deltas are the longest and the most academically challenging because of all the math and pharmacology and medicine, anatomy, physiology, and all the science. But that's not to take away from the complexity of like being a Charlie or an Echo or a Bravo or even an Alpha who has to learn how to run a team in a foreign country.
I don't know why, but it seems like in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of Navy SEALs that have been publicized.
It's not really the last recent years. It's, there's running jokes about it in our community as well. They can call it a stereotype, but it's not really a stereotype if it's true. I mean, I've worked with a lot of SEALs, and the ones that I've worked with, I can say most of them went on to do something to promote themselves as SEALs. It's just like, I don't know, it's a cultural thing. One of the aspects of like the personality traits that kind of reflect upon certain groups, as Green Berets, we're called the quiet professionals. You don't see a lot of Green Berets getting up and being on TV and, becoming movie stars and look at me, look at me, look at me. I wrote a book and look how cool I am, because the community doesn't support that structure. You're pretty much looked down upon for doing that. It's become a little bit more acceptable, but it has to do with your intention. If your intention is to bring glory to the unit, is to bring knowledge about the sacrifices of your team, to explain like how much these guys sacrifice, how amazing they are, and even what they struggle through and what help they need, that's generally acceptable. But if I was sitting on here and telling you about my war efforts and the mission that I did and the guy that I killed and the guy that I saved and the monkey that I delivered, that's just self-glorification, and that's not something that's acceptable in our community. SEALs are a little bit more accepting of that. Not all of them.
I was listening to an interview Chris Williamson did with, I'm trying to remember the guy's actual name. This is his YouTube name, Mr. Ballin. And he
He's a SEAL.
Yeah. But he, he's known for doing these true crime stories now. That's what he does on YouTube. But he said when he started, he was talking about his training and stuff like that. And this was, civilian life. He's done with the military. He's doing something else. And he's just like, the level of hate he got when he started posting. And so he was saying, no. He's like, yeah, I mean, there are SEALs who are very famous, but you will get a ton of hate if you start talking about it. And yeah.
It does happen. I think maybe the SEAL community is shifting in that direction. It's a little late. Like, we know everything from like the color of your underwear now as a SEAL. Our community largely just had that mentality to begin with. And so we never let it really flourish. I think the SEALs were just, maybe with good intention, they tried to glorify for recruitment purposes, and they had these cool commercials where some guy with like all black is just jumping out of an aircraft in the middle of the night and it just says Navy, right? And they're like, who the heck does that in the Navy? Like, you're in boats, you're in submarines. Why is this guy jumping out of a plane? Do you have planes in the Navy?
Yeah.
Right. So I think a lot of that was like marketing for the Navy to recruit, which was great because we needed guys. I mean, we were really hurting for bodies in these long wars that we engaged in. But I think guys got out and they had cool stories, they had great experiences, and they were like, I don't know what else to do. And people are asking me about what I did. And it just so happens that I did do some cool things. And now I'm talking about it, but it's really coming across like I'm bragging about myself. And then other guys were doing it and other guys were doing it. And they started making really good money. They're selling books. Let's be honest. If you're a 20-year veteran of any special operations, chances are you might have a cool story to tell.
Yeah.
Maybe one, right?
Yeah.
So is it wrong for these guys to get paid for that? Is it wrong for them to be compensated for their 20 years of service? I don't really think so, but it falls back on, I think, the intention. Like,
right.
What are you actually trying to do? Like, are you just trying to glorify yourself to sell your products and your things?
Right.
A little bit of integrity, I think, gets pushed aside when there's money involved.
Sure. Yeah. So, so he's one, right? Jocko's another. Goggins is another.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I think's interesting about Goggins is he was kind of discovered in a way just because he's crazy. Like, he was discovered because he's doing a 100-mile race by himself, and some guy's like, who the heck?
Like, repeatedly.
Yeah, like, who is this guy? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and he's never run a marathon. And he's going to do it. Like, just, there's something different about that guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, like, but I think another reason that SEALs in particular, I'm just throwing it out there, but we're in California,
Sure.
and it's very iconic, the training on
Sure.
the shore of like the San Diego area coast. Yeah. That image just stays with you, right? Mm-hmm. They're all like interlocked and the waves are coming in.
Yeah, and you think about it, this is a mysterious unit. This isn't something that you see every day. These are elite athletes. They're, I don't know how to express, like, when you compare the performance requirements of a special operations individual, you can only really compare them to a professional athlete in terms of their performance and their expectations. except the professional athlete gets millions of dollars and he gets treated by the best doctors in the world and he gets the best food in the world. He has his own chef and he travels in luxury and he sleeps in luxury and he dates a supermodel. What do we get? We get grade C food, which is what they serve in prisons to the military. We deny most of our injuries just so we can continue to do our jobs. I've had guys that had broken bones that refused to admit they had broken bones so I could get them off of a deployment or off of a mission. So these are guys that are willing to suffer anything to do their jobs and to make their teammates proud and to protect them. And that's not a personality type that you run into very often. So, I mean, the community, like people in general, they know, okay, SEALs do this crazy cool stuff, but they don't see it. They don't hear about it. What they do is secret. How they do it is secret. What they use is secret. So when you garner all this mysterious like cover around what you do, what you eat, what you say, where you sleep, everything. Yeah, dude, there's one running down the shore.
Yeah.
You know, or there's one coming at me in a Zodiac.
Yeah.
It's memorable.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we did a really cool thing as Green Berets. We invited our families out one time and my kids were down on the ground and they're like, everybody look up. And we had jumped out of the airplane above them and we were parachuting down into the group. Like that was cool.
Yeah.
You know? So it's kind of fun to be able to interact with civilians like that. I think that, you know, we just have very different community acceptable policies in terms of like how much we share or what we share. I think honestly, to give credit what it is due, there's a ton of SEALs coming out right now that are very upset with the guys that have made reputations off of the backs of teammates, right? And not everybody did that, but a lot of people did take credit for things they didn't do or took credit for what a team did and didn't mention their team. So people aren't very careful in that nature. And I think the SEAL community is really pissed off about it. In Delta, for example, like they will erase you from the records. You never came to Delta. You never did this. You never did that. Just because you mentioned something about being in it or did something with it. Or, I mean, that's exaggerated, but that's the kind of mentality that there is about sharing. You really have to have a good reason. You have to be very careful what it is you share.
Mm. Since there is that iconic, you know, thing about the SEALs training, right? Mm-hmm. The ringing the bell, all this kind of stuff. Are there any iconic elements of what would it be? Green Beret training, Delta training? What would you call it?
It would be Special Forces training.
Special Forces
would be the most accurate way to say it. It's not as publicized. Like it's not really advertised in any way. Like I didn't know anything about selection until I started to train for it, right? And our selection, it's about 3 weeks long and 24 days, I think. It's been a long time. And it is an assessment of what you can do. So they'll tell you, and there's no information put out. So they'll say, grab your running shoes, put them in your ruck, and start going down this road. And you go, well, how far am I going? Do the best you can. Candidate is what they call you, candidate. Okay, how do I know where I'm going? Do the best you can, candidate. Follow the truck. And this truck is out in front of you and it's just driving down the road and you're just carrying this heavy ass bag all the way down this road. And you have no idea where you're going, how far you're going, when you're going to stop. They just want you to go as fast as you can. So do I pace myself for 5 miles? Do I pace myself for 1 mile? Like, could I sprint this whole thing and beat everyone and be the top of the class? Or am I going to smoke myself and be exhausted because this is a 20 mile, right? You don't know. You don't have standards. They aren't told to you. And when you take a bunch of people from the military who are told when to get up, what to dress in, how to behave, where to stand, when to stand there, when they can pee, and you tell them, I'm not going to tell you anything about what you're going to do except that you have to do it, a lot of them kind of implode in their heads. And I think that's one of the hardest things about selection for people is that they don't know what they're going to do. Sure, it's physically challenging, but if I told anyone to do 1,000 push-ups, they're going to be tired. It's not like magically harder because you're a SEAL or harder because you're a Ranger. It's hard. But the assessment is kind of an iconic thing. at a point in which they separate the group and they read off the roster numbers, because you don't go by name there, you go by a number, and they read off a list of numbers, and then they pause because they haven't told you if the list that they've read is the guys that got picked or if they're the guys that, so you wonder, like, did they go to some reality TV show training to do this? Because this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they'll read off this list, and all of a sudden you'll see that there's like a huge group over here and a little group over here. And guess what? The little group are the guys that made it. We don't have a bell to ring out. You just basically put your hand up and quit. We call it to VW, voluntarily withdraw. For the most part, if you VW through any of our pipeline, you are never to return. You can't try out again. It's like inexcusable to quit. You can break an ankle and come back when you're healed, but if you quit, we don't want to see your face again. We have Nasty Nick, which is an obstacle course that is pretty famous in the Green Beret community. But as far as like, we don't have like an iconic bell or like a beautiful shoreline. You know?
Right.
Army puts bases in crappy locations. And that's where we typically train.
So it's guessing not on the coast.
Not usually.
Where are these training areas?
The headquarters for all U.S. Special Forces, which includes SEALs, Rangers, everybody, the hub of it is it was called Fort Bragg. Now I think they changed the name to Camp Liberty because it's, I don't know. Everything's offensive to everybody nowadays. Anyway, it's in North Carolina, and it is a massive base. There's other units there, 82nd Airborne, you know, all sorts of iconic units are there, but all the core training is done there for special operations. So the SEALs will conduct BUDS at, you know, Coronado Beach, but they might do some of their advanced training. They might go to Fort Bragg because they have the resources to provide these advanced skills courses. The Green Berets, that's kind of our hub. That's where the medical school is. It's called JSOM-TC, the medical school there. The Language Training Institute that we have has a hub there. The main one is at Monterey, California. Delta is right outside of our gates. Third group is right there. There was a time where there was a lot of other resources there, but it's been spread out. Like they sent 7th group down to Florida in 2011 or something like that. I can't remember. They were right up there in Fort Bragg before. So other than like the selection, the iconic like weeding out and the obstacle course, we don't have anything that significant like the SEALs do.
What are some misconceptions the general public has about special forces?
That's kind of funny. I mean, I'd like to almost like turn to my wife and be like, what did you think when you heard that you were going to date a Green Beret? I think most people generally think that we are like robotic in our approach to life, and that we don't display emotion, that we are rigid, like our way or the highway type attitudes. And I don't think all of the associations with our units are positive. I think most of them are negative. And that is probably because most of the time you ever hear about a guy that's done something crazy and is in the military, you hear about it on the news as like a PTSD veteran, former Green Beret, loses his mind, shoots himself, or fires on cops, or abuses wife, or something crazy like that. So it's not like anyone's really talking about the good stuff that people do, right? I mean, the news isn't designed to give you good news. So I think there's a lot of negative publicity that the community as a general, special operations gets. But I think that most people probably think we're pretty robotic. We don't have any emotions. We just like we're killing machines or whatever. I don't know. I never really spent a lot of time asking people what they thought about like us or me.
Right. You were on how many tours?
So I deployed with the military, but I also deployed with other organizations in support of Department of Defense contracts and with agencies. I'm trying to word all this correctly. Officially 3, unofficially probably closer to 20.
Define a tour.
Okay. A tour is it's definitely got a description that falls within the parameters of this is a tour, that is not a tour. A tour is typically when your organization does a workup to go overseas to do a particular task for a given amount of time. And it doesn't always fall within the parameters of a combat operation. So you've got combat tours, but you've got other tours. It could be a training exercise. That could be considered a deployment. But we typically don't call those tours. Typically, when in our community we're talking about a tour, we're talking about a trip into a combat zone, into hostile environments and back. That's typically what we're referring to.
Is there a length of time, like you'll never go longer than this before they bring you back, or is it open-ended as to how short or long a tour is?
One of the nice things about being in special operations is that typically your tours are not as long. Like if I had been in like an infantry platoon, I might have been gone for like 13 months. Whereas as a ODA, it might be 8 months, might be 6 months. I've done shorter than 6 months as well. I've done some trips that were like 3 months, 4 months. And the difference being is that we don't have any downtime in those trips. So like when an infantry unit or a conventional unit goes overseas, they're there 13 months. But in that 13 months, they may celebrate holidays. They could get weekends off. They can fly home for a brief period of time. Some units, they allow that to happen. But when we go downrange, we work 7 days a week. There are no weekends. There are no days off. There are no holidays. Some units go downrange and they conduct like an average of 2 missions a day. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we burn the candle a little bit brighter, but the candle's not as long.
Where were you sent?
A few places, a few that I can say and a few that I can't. The places that I can: Syria was my last deployment, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Philippines. I worked with an anti-poaching unit in Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, and then there's a couple of places that I worked that were kind of unofficial. But most of it was in the Middle East, but a lot of it ended up being in Africa as well.
What was the worst climate that you had to live in?
That's a tough one. I gotta say, Syria was brutal.
Really?
Syria's brutal. Strong, high winds, intense sun, no shelter in that desert at all. Relentless. But that's kind of what you expect from like a brutal desert, right? Mozambique was pretty scary, actually. But as far as that was more of like cultural and people. But as far as atmosphere, I'd say we were in some mountains in Afghanistan doing a hostage rescue mission. And we went from Jalalabad, which is like 20 degrees hotter than everywhere else in Afghanistan, to like the peak of this mountain. It was like 100 degrees out on the tarmac. And the next thing we know, it's snowing on us. None of us had prepared for it. So we were freezing and starving and stuck on this mountain in a snowstorm. That was brutal. I don't know. I think it's kind of weird. You don't really think about the environment as much. You've got so much going on. It's kind of like, people get fixated on like halo school, like high altitude, low opening school. And you're like, you realize that that's your mode of transportation to work, right? Like if you rephrase it that way, people are like, yeah, I guess it's not really that cool, because that's actually how you just get to work. That's like you riding a motorcycle versus me riding the bus.
Right.
So the environment can, it can whoop your ass. It normally does. It's going to be hot, miserable. I honestly think Fort Benning, Georgia, that was miserable. I've never been in a more humid place in my entire life. My skin had just like dehydrated so much that my skin had become like crinkly, like it does in a jacuzzi.
Yeah, right.
And I could literally set like a quarter in an open palm. It was that bad.
Wow.
It was miserable.
Are there any things that happen on deployment that after a certain period of time, there becomes more friction in a team just because of how long you've been there? Or what are the forces of stress on a team?
What's interesting about ODAs is that they're almost like clubs, and we have like a team room where, the kids don't come in, the wives don't come in, and you got all your cool stuff in, and it's your space. It's your man cave, for lack of a better term. And The team builds rapport by doing all these different activities. They get up in the morning and they go to work together. They do PT. They suffer through the same workouts. They joke about stuff. They watch the same movie and they talk. I mean, it's like you build this bond of friendship. And in any friendship, there's friction points and there's some people that get along better with other people. But I think what makes some of these special operations teams work, regardless of the personalities, is they have a unified goal that trumps all those other cards. It doesn't matter how well I actually went on an anti-poaching deployment with a couple dev group guys and a SEAL, and we didn't get along. We didn't get along at all. But one of the SEALs had the integrity to come up one day and say, hey, dude, I don't like you. You don't like me, but let's just agree to make it work for the purpose that we're here. And I can totally respect that. Yeah. Okay. And we did. The other guys didn't, but he and I did. So you find ways around it. And there's always going to be guys that end up leaving a team. Like some guy might just not fit in, or a guy might do something that the team doesn't approve of. Next thing he knows is he shows up to work and his bags are outside of the team door. So he just got fired. Now he has to go solicit himself to another team, which isn't always easy to do.
How do you, now that you're a civilian, right? Is that what you call it, or what would you call it?
Yeah, just regular bearded guy.
Yeah, with a different past, yes. How do you process, and how do others process in healthy ways what you've been through?
That's the trick, right? I mean, being in horrible places, seeing, doing, feeling horrible things and not letting them impact who you are in a negative way. I found retirement to be extremely difficult, very difficult, because I hadn't planned it. I hadn't planned to stay for 20 years either, but I had made no preparations to retire. I had no job lined up. I didn't have a place to live. I had nothing, no savings, nothing. So when my medical retirement came up, the injuries that I had, I could not perform at 38 at the level that I wanted to. And so by 39, I had to retire. And a guy came up to me and was like, hey, how old do you think is the oldest NFL player? I'm like, I don't know. I don't watch football. And they're like, well, I'll tell you what, they're not in their 40s, dude. Like, you've done a lot of damage and you don't have NFL level doctors treating you and helping you heal. So you kind of need little like messages like that to make it okay to let go, like to know that the team is going to be taken care of, that you can let go, that someone else is going to carry the torch. But as far as the trauma goes, I don't know. With a lot of help. I mean, I spent 500 days in recovery and treatment for my injuries, but those injuries also included like the nightmares and my inability to like balance when I close my eyes or when people turn off the lights, or all this damage that had been done to the way that my brain put information together that it got. So I spent a lot of time rewiring the way my brain, because we actually rewired it in all the training and conditioning and things that we had done. We wired it so that we did crazy crap, like we ran towards gunfire instead of away from it, right? That's not a normal, healthy thing to do. And that's just like the soft tissue trauma. That's not even like the injuries that we sustain. So I think I was blessed. I've always been in really amazing teams that did amazing things, and I got to do amazing things. I had a very supportive family. I had something to live for other than myself, my daughters, my mom. If I had died, my mom would have killed me. Like, she would have literally pulled me out of my casket and whooped my ass if I had died in combat. And then I had friends that were already retired who they knew what I was going through. They could relate. And they were like, hey, I know that you're feeling this way right now, but think of it this way. So how they had overcome things, they shared that with me. And that made my transition easier. I had an amazing colonel through my recovery. and he was instrumental in my recovery. I mean, he basically let me do whatever I needed to do to heal. Oh, you need to go to third group and teach a low visibility shooting course to feel better? Go do that. You need to, like, anything that made me feel like I was still participating and contributing. Third group was amazing about letting me come back and helping with that stuff, because I needed purpose. Like, I was literally drowning in absence of purpose. And the colonel let me decide when to quit. So when I took my performance test to get back to my unit, I passed, but my scores weren't great. And so I went up to the colonel. He was a former 7th group surgeon. And so he had been dealing with guys like me his entire career. He wasn't a special forces guy, but he had been the 7th group surgeon forever. And he was now like one of the colonels at a major hospital on Fort Bragg, Womack. And he said to me, he said, so you passed your tests? And I said, yeah. And he said, awesome. So you're ready to go back to a team? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, how'd you do? And I said, I passed. He's like, compared to before? And I said, it wasn't as good. And he said, okay, are you ready to be the weakest link on your team? And with that question, like, nightmares, right? He did the only thing he could have done to get me to quit, was he made it about my team. And he knew that. I mean, he's a smart dude. He knew what he was dealing with. So he totally walked me into that trap. But I slept on that decision for a while. And then I came back and I said, no, I'm not. And I put it in my retirement packet that day. After like months of busting my butt to get back on a team, like suffering needlessly for months to get back to a team. I mean, he could have asked me that before, and then I would have just been like, yeah, I'm just going to sit on this couch and get fat and eat Oreos and Twinkies. But no, he waited for me to fight tooth and nail to get back before he did that.
Do you think that's pretty common? That's the single biggest thing most people struggle with, is the lack of purpose?
I think that's one of them. I think the other thing is that people tell them to find something to replace what you were doing. I would love for you to show me a job where I can jump out of an aircraft at 30,000 feet in oxygen masks and glide across an international border into another country and land a small team of people in a swimming pool size area, and then shoot at bad guys and perform surgery. Where? What are you going to do? So it's completely erroneous to tell people to replace this. I learned the hard way that what you had to do is you had to let go of that life. You had to put a period at the end of that story and then rewrite a new one. Reinvent yourself. So don't try to keep that story going. That story's done. Like the climax has been spoken. The ending is done. Don't try to keep telling a story, right? Like, don't make a Fast and Furious 7, 8, 9, 10. The first 2 sucked, but they were good enough to get a 1 and 2, but don't 7, 8, 9, 10 me. It's too much. So let the story die. And that's what I had to do, is I had to like let that story die and realize that I can't continue it. And so you had to give up, right? Surrender. Again, I'm surrendering. First, I had to surrender my life and my faith, right? So I'm constantly surrendering, which is what soldiers don't do. So this is why it's really hard, right? Becoming a Christian was hard. I was a soldier. What did I have to do? I had to surrender. So I'm finding myself in these places where I've got to like let go of the imaginary control that I have. And that was another spot I had to do it. And once I realized that I had to let that go and start from a new beginning, it made the transition a lot easier.
How often do you see people that you used to serve with or that you knew from your career days?
I don't. I bounced around a lot of different little teams and a lot of like very elite, tiny programs that had like lived out their days. And it was one trip and that program disappeared. Most of everybody that I knew died in combat. Um, there's a handful of people from different ODAs and teams and programs that are around, but most of them are on the East Coast. That's where most of everything was happening. So there's a couple SEALs that I've worked with that are still on this side of the country, a couple MARSOC guys, but for the most part, maybe a text here and there, but I don't see anybody or really keep in touch with anybody.
Mm. Are there any things that your experiences in warfare, being a soldier, changed the way you saw the gospel or emphasized certain parts about your faith that somebody who didn't have those experiences couldn't relate to?
You know, it was such a big influence to become a Christian that I don't know that it played out in any like very specific expression of like a Christian act or behavior, other than I think it let me explore other possibilities to solutions and answers, but it solidified the parameters of what's right and wrong. In special operations, we very frequently operate in a gray space. Very gray. It's not black, it's not white. It's not right, it's not wrong. We don't really know what it is. And Christianity helps kind of wipe that fog off, that blindness or that confusion. I think largely it changed the way that I behaved with people that I struggled with. I always repeated a saying in my head when I was finding myself frustrated with not getting something or something not turning out the way I wanted it. And that was, the true measure of a man is the way that he behaves when he doesn't get what he wants. And I'd like to think that that's a very Christian belief, is that wanting something is very human, but then having the grace to recognize that it's not there for you, or it's not the time, or the answer is no, requires discipline, self-control, and a lot of humility. One thing that I had to learn, and it's a really like key moment in my Christian learning, was actually from my daughter, Tyler. She was a little girl at the time, and I was watching one of the rare occasions that I had come home. I was home and I was watching my daughter before my second daughter was born. And my wife, I think, was with her family. And my daughter, I was getting ready to put her to bed. And I'm like, what do you want for dinner? And she says, I want ice cream. I'm like, okay, well, you can't have ice cream. And she's like, well, why not? I like it. It tastes good. Why can't I have it? I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how do I explain to this child that I can't explain the nutritional benefits of good food versus bad food, or talk to her about her glucose, but how do I express to this child that I'm not giving you the thing that you know you want, that's good for you, that you're asking for, but not because I want to hurt you. It's for reasons you don't understand and you don't see, that I'm not giving you what you want. But trust me, it's for you. It's to protect you. And like, I'm saying this to her and I got like chills. I'm like, that's God. Like that's what God says. And when you make a prayer and you're like, God, please give me this 72 Mustang with it. You know, when you're doing your prayers and you're like, God's either going to deliver this Mustang or he didn't hear me, right? We don't say God said no, right? We just say God didn't hear me. How come God doesn't hear my prayers? He hears your prayers. He hears every prayer. Sometimes the answer is no. And I learned that from my daughter when she was like 5. It was crazy. Just like the way that God put that message in that little package with ponytails. And it's been interesting. You learn lessons. God is so creative. Like you learn lessons in the most interesting ways. And the one thing I had to do when I became a Christian, it was the one condition that I absolutely had to give myself on November 28th, the day that I became a Christian. I surrendered the concept of coincidence. That was my one condition. I'll never use that word again, because that is, the word coincidence by definition is how you kill a miracle. So if you don't believe in miracles and you only believe in coincidence, then you can't believe in God, because God is all powerful, which means he knows everything, which means everything is designed, which means nothing is coincidence.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you would like to end on? Anything that was on your mind or heart before?
Gosh, maybe a good note. We talked a lot about like sad, depressing stuff. Having accepted Christianity into my life was a really hard thing for me. I mean, it was really hard. And I'll say something that I'm not proud of. I burned a Bible once because I was angry at, it doesn't matter who, but that's how angry I was. And I was arrogant enough to think that my feelings should be something that God was like, oh, wait a minute, let me see how Oz thinks about this. And let me run this by him. It was a really tough dying to oneself to be reborn, but I had no idea. Nobody told me how hard being reborn was. Like I kept feeling like I was a failure. And I think that's not a unique thing. I think a lot of people probably have felt that. So if I were to end on any note, I would say, if you find God, and we all do eventually, my ex-wife said, when you lose everything, you will find God. And she was right. When you find God, be gentle with yourself. Don't measure yourself to the standards that you think that God has for you, because those are the measures that you think God has. That's no standard to hold yourself up against, because you're not going to disappoint God.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's awesome.
Thanks for having me.